Shooters in the UK are being urged to respond to the Health and Safety Executive's report on banning lead ammunition. The HSE's report proposes restrictions on the use of lead bullets for outdoor target shooting and hunting, plus restricting the use and sale of lead shot. The 6-month public consultation closes on the 6th of November 2022. There are allowances for authorised athletes. BASC says it will challenge the proposed restrictions where there are no viable alternatives to lead.
The shooting sector is not alone in having huge issues with component parts, raw materials, machining, tooling, even sort of the labour and the workforce. So those are all challenges which need to be reflected in it. So it's very difficult to say where we would be in the future. But I do think BASC, along with the other organisations, absolutely what we've got to do now over the period of consultation is to engage, is to be robust, be challenging, be credible, and try and get to the end of this where if we do have restrictions, that it is on that basis of necessity and proportionality to the risk that has been identified. And that's all part and parcel of the consultation process, really. And it's having the evidence base to go back to the regulator and say, actually, in this specific circumstance, there isn't a viable alternative. So, for sake of argument, if they are saying there's an 18-month transition period for a given element, and we go back with evidence to say that is just technically not possible, it's economically not viable to do, then one would hope, as they are, a regulator who works on an evidence base and proportionality, is that they would offer some form of exemption or derogation to allow that continue, or additionally look at transition periods which reflect the fact that if we engage with the manufacturers, and I'm sure UK Reach will engage with the manufacturers, is to say what is technically and economically viable and how quickly or how long is that going to take. So I think that protection question, so how do we protect those people where there aren't the viable alternatives? I think that's very much about the consultation process. And I suppose the other thing that I would add to that is that there is quite a lot of areas where actually there is technical viability, but the questions are more around, is it economically viable, and actually how quickly can we move to that alternative? Because technically it might be viable to make bullets out of gold, but nobody's going to be able to afford to do that. So that is a sort of an off the wall thing, but it just demonstrates the point of actually these things have got to be technically, economically viable. And equally, the regulator's got to think about the risk. So there's at some point a convergence of those things which says proportionate, necessary, and if we can't get to the proportionate and necessary, how do we deal with it then through the derogation or the exemption process? I think sometimes organisations, and it's not just BASC, the voluntary transition is 9 shooting and rural organisations together, and actually it's very much about leadership. And I think sometimes, in leadership terms, you've actually got to sit down and make some hard decisions, because whilst it may not be popular at this present point in time, so if we reflect on the voluntary transition, certainly at the outset that was really difficult, and there was kickback from members on that. But actually I think it's about the mindset of where, if we are going to continue as a community, as a sector, as people who shoot, where do we need to be in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, to make sure that my kids, their kids, and everybody in between are able to continue to go shooting. And actually I think the issue of lead is one that has hung over the sector for an awfully long time, and I do think that people are reflecting on now, actually in light of the UK Reach announcement, on the positivity of a voluntary transition, which has in essence given the sector, for shotgun ammunition at least, a bit of a head start on this stuff. So I think whilst at the moment some people may see it as a pandering to the antis or sort of going down that route, very much not. It's actually about the shooting sector putting a marker down the sand and saying, actually, this is where we want to get to, because this is how we see that we as a community are going to be able to survive 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the time. And actually it is so much better to be doing things in a proactive fashion. than allowing people to set the agenda for you. So actually the shooting community is setting the agenda, and I think people are, proud of that, and I think are pleased to see that. And yes, there are always going to be people that don't agree with the way or the direction of travel that things are going, but I think on reflection, it was, the voluntary transition was a positive move, particularly now in light of these proposals. And there's still much work to be done with getting the community making the switch over to lead where it's a viable alternative. Over the coming weeks, we, BASC and the other shooting organisations, are going to be looking at this. We will be launching imminently a kind of a detailed frequently asked questions through our website, so people can go on there and they can look at how this proposal might impact on their particular aspect of the sport that they practice. So they can go through and get that, and over the coming weeks we'll be updating that with more detail. And I guess one of the things that I would say is that the REACH proposals on lead ammunition extend to about 500 odd pages of information, so it's going to take us time. So I guess from a membership perspective, we will keep members and the wider shooting community updated on regular intervals, but the information is going to be limited at the outset because there's just such a volume of stuff to consider.